JMJC Radio,
news,
sports,
wrestling,
and much more. Welcome to a new episode of JMJC Radio. I am your host, Jeremy Chaput. In this episode, I want to talk to you guys about what happened to every member of the 1966-67 Toronto Maple Leafs Stanley Cup team. First of all, for that season, the Maple Leafs went 32, 27, and 11 and finished with 75 points. In the playoffs, in the semifinals, they beat the Chicago Blackhawks 4-2. At that time, the Blackhawks had Phil Esposito, Glenn Hall, Bubby and Dennis Hall, Stan Mikita, and Doug Moens. And then in the finals, they beat the Montreal Canadiens 4-2. And Montreal had Jean Beliveau, Dick Duff, and Henry Richard. Now, their general manager and head coach was Punch Imlach. He coached Toronto until the end of the 68-69 season. He then coached 2 seasons in Buffalo, and then he coached 10 games in Toronto during the 78-79 season. Moving over to the players. First up, we have Dave Keon. During the regular season, he had 66 games played, 19 goals, 33 assists for 52 points. During the playoffs, he played 12 games, had 3 goals and 5 assists for a total of 8 points. He stayed with Toronto until the end of the 74-75 seasons. He then played 3 seasons in the WHA before spending his final 3 seasons with the Hartford Whalers. Moving over to Frank Mahovlich. During the regular season, he played 63 games, had 18 goals, 28 assists for a total of 46 points. And in the playoffs, he had 3 goals, 7 assists, and 10 points in 12 games. He stayed with Toronto until the end of the 67-68 season. He then spent 3 seasons with Detroit, 4 seasons with Montreal, and played his final 4 seasons in the WHA. Moving over to Bob Pulford, who was one of their alternative captains at the time. During the regular season, he played 67 games, had 17 goals, 28 assists for a total of 45 points, and in the playoffs, he played 12 games, had 1 goal and 10 assists for 11 points. He stayed with Toronto until the end of the 69-70 season. Then he played his final 2 seasons for the LA Kings. Next up, we have Ron Ellis, who during the regular season that season played 67 games, had 22 goals, 23 assists for a total of 45 points. And during the playoffs, he had 2 goals, 1 assist, and 3 points in 12 games. He stayed with Toronto until he retired at the end of the 1980-81 season. Moving over to Pete Stemkowski. During the regular season, he had 13 goals, 22 assists, and 35 points in 68 games. During the playoffs, he played 12 games where he had 5 goals and 7 assists for a total of 12 points. He played 60 games for the Toronto Maple Leafs during the 67-68 season before being traded to Detroit. He played basically 2 1/4 seasons before being traded to the Rangers. He played for the Rangers for 5 3/4 seasons, the Kings for 1 season, then finished his career with 1 season in the AHL. Next up, moving over to George Armstrong, who was their captain for that season. During the regular season, he played 70 games, had 9 goals, 24 assists, and 33 points. In the playoffs, he played 9 games, had 2 goals and 1 assist for 3 points, and he stayed with Toronto until he retired at the end of the 70-71 season. Moving over to Jim Pappin. During the regular season, he had 64 games played, 21 goals, 11 assists, and 32 points, and during the playoffs, he had 12 games played, 7 goals, 8 assists, and 15 points. He stayed with Toronto until the end of the 67-68 season. He played 6 seasons for the Blackhawks, 1 season for the California Golden Seals, and then 1 season for the Cleveland Barons. Next up, we have Larry Jeffrey, where during the regular season he played 56 games, had 11 goals and 17 assists for 28 points, and in the playoffs he had played in 6 games and had 1 assist for a total of 1 point, and he played 2 seasons for the Rangers before he retired. Moving over to Brian Conacher. If I say any of the names wrong, I am sorry. During the regular season, he played in 66 games, had 14 goals and 13 assists for a total of 27 points, and in the playoffs, he had 12 goals. He played in 12 games, had 3 goals, 2 assists for a total of 5 points. He played 68 games for Toronto during the 67-68 season before being sent down to the AHL. He played 22 games for Detroit during the 71-72 season before spending 40 games in the CHL, 1 season in the WHL, taking 2 seasons off, then finishing his career with 3 games in the NAHL. Moving over to Eddie Shack. During the regular season, he played 63 games, had 11 goals and 14 assists for 25 points, and in the playoffs, he played 8 games and had 0 points. He played for Boston for 2 years, the Kings for 1 season and 11 games, Buffalo for 2 seasons, Pittsburgh for 1 season and 18 games. He then came back for Toronto for 1 season and 26 games before finishing his career with 8 games in the CHL and 9 games in the OHA Senior. Moving over to Mike Walton. During the regular season, he played 31 games, had 7 goals, 10 assists for 17 points, and during the playoffs, he played in 12 games, had 4 goals, 3 assists, and 7 points. He stayed with Toronto until halfway through the 70-71 season before being traded to Boston. He played in Boston for 2.5 seasons before playing 3 seasons in the WHA, 3 seasons for Vancouver, spent the 78-79 season with 5 different teams before finishing his final season in the 1G Bun. Moving over to John Brennanman. During the regular season, he played in 41 games, had 6 goals and 4 assists for 10 points, and in the playoffs, he played in 13 games, had 3 goals and 3 points. He played the 67-68 season with 4 different teams, the 68-69 season with 2 different teams, before finishing his career with 1 season in the IHL, 1 season in the OHL Senior, and 1 season in the AUT. Moving over to Brett Shelby. He played 6 games where he had 1 goal, 1 assist, and 2 points for Toronto before being traded to Vancouver. He didn't even play in the playoffs for Toronto during the Cup. He spent 1 season with the Flyers before coming back to Toronto for 1.5 seasons, and then he spent another season with St. Louis before finishing his career with 1 season in the CHL, then 3 seasons in the WHA. Moving over to Wayne Carleton. He played 5 games where he had 1 goal and 1 point before being sent down to the CHL, then AHL in the same season. His final 10 seasons were spent with 12 different teams in 4 different leagues. Next up, we have Brent Imlach. He played 1 game with Toronto before being sent to the WOHL, and then he spent 3 seasons in the OQAA before spending his final 2 years in the OUAA. Next up, we have Dick Gamble, who played one game for Toronto before being sent down to the AHL for 4 seasons. Moving over to Red Kelly. During the regular season, he played 61 games, had 14 goals and 24 assists for 38 points. And in the playoffs, he played 15 games, had 5 assists and 5 points, and he retired after that season was done. Moving over to Mr. Tim Horton. During the regular season, he played in 70 games, had 8 goals, 17 assists, and 25 points. In the playoffs, he played 12 games, had 3 goals and 5 assists for 8 points. He stayed with Toronto until being traded to the Rangers towards the end of the 69-70 season. He then played 1 season with New York, 1 year with Pittsburgh, and 2 years with Buffalo. Moving over to Larry Hillman. During the regular season, he played 55 games, had 4 goals, 19 assists, and 23 points. And in the playoffs, he played in 12 games, had 1 goal and 2 assists for a total of 3 points. He stayed with Toronto 1 more season before playing for the North Stars and Canadiens in 68-69. He spent the next 2 seasons with the Flyers before playing the rest of his career for the Sabres, Crusaders, and Jets. Moving over to Marcel Pronovost. During the regular season, he played 58 games, 2 goals, 12 assists for a total of 14 points. During the playoffs, he had 1 point, which was a goal in 12 games. He played for Toronto until he retired at the end of the 70-71 season. Next up, we have Kent Douglas. And during the regular season, he played 39 games, had 2 goals, 12 assists, and 14 points, and he did not play in the playoffs. He spent the next 9 seasons playing for 7 different teams in 5 different leagues. Next up, we have their other alternative captain, Alan Stanley. During the regular season, he played in 53 games, had 1 goal and 12 assists for 13 points, and during the playoffs, he had 2 assists and 2 points in 12 games. He spent the next season with Toronto before finishing his career with 1 season as a Flyer. Moving over to Bobby Bond, who during the regular season had 54 games played, 2 goals, 8 assists, and 10 points, and played 10 games in the playoffs with 0 points. He spent 1 season with the Oakland Seals, 2 seasons and 11 games with Detroit before playing his last 3 seasons with the Leafs again. Next up, we have Jim McKinney. During the regular season, he played in 6 games and had 1 goal and 1 point, and he did not play in the playoffs. He stayed with Toronto until he got traded at the start of the 78-79 season to the Dallas Blackhawks, where he spent his final 4 seasons with 4 different teams, including Dallas, in 3 different leagues. Next up, we have Dwayne Rapp, who during the regular season played 3 games and did not play in the playoffs, and he spent his final 9 seasons with 7 different teams in 3 different leagues. Next up, we have Terry Sawchuk, who during the regular season played in 28 games, had a 16-6-3 record, 2 shutouts, a 2.81 goals against average, and a .917 save percentage. And in the playoffs, he played in 10 games, had a 6-4 record, a 2.66 goals against average, and a .931 save percentage. He played his final 3 seasons for LA, Detroit, and the Rangers. And next up, we have Johnny Bower, who during the regular season played in 43 games, had a record of 12-9-3, 2 shutouts, a 2.64 goals against average, and a .924 save percentage. And then the playoffs, played in 4 games, had a 2-0 record, a 1.64 goals against average, and a .957 save percentage. And he played for Toronto until he retired at the end of the 69-70 season. And the final three players who I didn't put any information about because they only played one game with Toronto, and then for some reason I don't remember, but the other three players that also played for Toronto: Bruce Gamble, Al Smith, and Gary Smith. Well, there you guys have it. There's what happened to every member of the 1966-67 Toronto Maple Leafs Cup team. Hopefully this year will be the year, even though we, as Toronto Maple Leafs fans, say every year is our year. Thank you guys for listening. As my two sayings always go, always tell your loved ones you love them because you never know how much time you have left with them. And always shoot your shot before it's too late. Thank you guys for listening. Have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you next time.